Welcome to the Timbo Talks podcast, my weekly show about work and play and everything in between. It's a beautiful day today in Sydney, first day of March. Summer is technically over, but it still feels very much like summer. Clear sky, the birds are singing, it's wonderful. I just went out to my letterbox a moment ago before sitting down for this podcast, and there was a flyer in the letterbox, and I gotta say, it disturbed me. So it's like a colourful, glossy, two-sided flyer. A local contractor has put it in all the letterboxes, I imagine, in the street I live. He's a tree management expert, so he specialises in tree removal, tree pruning, stump grinding, gutter cleaning, etc. And you know, it's a very bright, colourful flyer, but what disturbed me about it is this tree removal expert, he has as his logo a mascot, which is, it's a really well drawn mascot. It's a tree, but it's anthropomorphized, so the tree has a face, it has two arms, two legs, and instead of hair, like branches are coming off the top of his trunk and there's some leaves, and he has this tree, this cartoon character has a big smile on his face. But what disturbs me is the tree is holding a chainsaw while he's grinning, and I don't know, that just doesn't sit right with me. I mean, imagine if like a hair salon or a barber did a flyer drop in your neighbourhood and they had a cartoon mascot, but it was like Michael Myers from the Halloween movies holding a great big pair of rusty scissors, or Jason from the Friday the 13th movies, like holding like an enormous razor. It just seems kind of crazy. So like this mascot, this cartoon mascot, really, to me, even though he seems jolly and happy, really seems like a serial killer. A tree serial killer. Anyway, it offends me. I guess it's not much different from a butcher having like a happy-looking pig or cow dressed in a butcher's apron and holding a butcher's knife. I guess it's the same thing. Anyway, if I was a tree, I'd be terrified if I saw this flyer. Today, I don't really want to talk about trees that are serial killers or psychotic-looking cartoon mascots. I want to talk about something equally terrifying to people, but often misunderstood, and that's the concept of the lone wolf. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I use the phrase lone wolf, I'm referring to a person, well, or an animal, because that's where the term comes from, who prefers to spend time alone rather than being in a group. And there's a good reason for this. If you identify as a lone wolf, or you have lone wolf tendencies, there are solid reasons for doing so. So people who are lone wolfish, they're keenly aware of their own talents and what makes them unique. And they have a strong aversion. Well, I know this is true in my case, because I definitely have lone wolf tendencies. A lone wolf doesn't want their identity subsumed into the group or something else. They don't want to lose their point of difference. Which, if you have a strong sense of self, that's quite terrifying to think that you have to give up what makes you, you. When I examine my own lone wolf tendencies, wait a minute, let's just hold on that, lone wolf. Lone wolf is quite a sexy term. I imagine like a sleek, cunning animal. But I was reminded this year, which according to Chinese astrology, it's the year of the ox. I am actually an ox. But what sounds better, a solitary plodding ox or lone wolf? I think I'll stick with lone wolf, although the ox does have plenty of positive characteristics. Anyway, back to what it means to be a lone wolf. When I examine my own feelings on the subject, I'm quite aware of the fact that if I don't spend time each day forging my own path, I don't mentally attend to that, by default, the world is going to define my path for me. That could be my colleagues, it could be my job, anything. But if you're not applying your attention to where you're going, someone else will happily do it for you by default. So really, to me, being a lone wolf is really making a slave of yourself to your own desires, whims, goals, whatever, because if you don't, someone else will happily make a slave of you. So really, what's better? You being in control or someone else? But lone wolves, especially today when there's so much focus on collaboration and working well together, particularly now where so much of our communication is like logging onto a virtual space, whether it's Zoom or Teams, we're sort of forced to work and interact with others, which is difficult for lone wolves. And this is probably a big reason why people who are lone wolves are viewed as like either deviant or aberrant. When we encounter someone that is different from the group we're part of, we tend to view them poorly because they're not lining up with the dominant culture that we're part of. And often when this is the case, a person, for example, a lone wolf, is viewed as having a fault in their personality. And so then people might think, well, that person, they prefer to do their own thing, they're uncommunicative, they don't work well with others. Or even worse, they could be accused of thinking too highly of themselves, thinking that they're better than others and they don't want to waste their time talking to other people. And I get that. If we're using the example of a lone wolf from the animal world, I mean, the strength of the pack is the wolf, but the strength of the wolf is the pack. So it's like a reciprocal arrangement. So a lone wolf is strong, independent, highly capable, but it is also important for the lone wolf to be in a pack. So as a lone wolf, there's a lot we can do on our own. There's a lot we can achieve, but we will eventually hit an upper limit or a ceiling, probably, because there's only so much we can do on our own. But I would really like to shift this conversation because I really want to jailbreak this idea that the lone wolf thinks more of themselves than they do others, because I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't think that's what's really going on. So the criticism of the lone wolf is they think they're more capable than others, and that might be true. Their experience could actually make them more capable than others, and therefore they look down their nose or snout, being a wolf, at others, and they would rather just spend the time, particularly in a work setting, getting on with what they do best. I think something else is going on, and I think now we've all been sort of pushed together virtually in an attempt to work better together. And the great hope of our new age of collaboration is that our organisations are going to become a lot smarter because we can connect with each other anytime we want. And so the idea is the collective intelligence of the group or pack we're in will increase exponentially. So this goes back to the strength of the pack is a wolf, but the strength of the wolf is the pack. But this is where lone wolves know in their bones that this doesn't work. And it's not really because they think the capability of others is beneath them. Some might. The real issue here is it's the quality of the interactions between us. For a lone wolf, the cost of compliance to have these interactions with others is too high, and they resent it. Well, what do I mean it's too high? Well, the format of our interactions, for instance, just sending out a Zoom or Microsoft Teams invite is really not enough. That it does not follow that there'll be quality interactions just based on that. Meetings are too frequent and too rigid. There's very little sense of ownership in our always collaborating culture. So for the lone wolf, someone who is really comfortable with their lone wolfishness, knows that these top-down directives to collaborate is not enough. It's not because the lone wolf regards his or her colleagues as stupid or deficient in any way. It's simply because the organisations that lone wolves are part of haven't successfully worked out how to create meaningful interactions between their people that shares the depth of thinking, the complexity of thinking, or the capability of those we call lone wolves with others. So it's likely that there's a lot of complex and deep thinkers. Some of them may be lone wolves, some of them may not, in organisations, but we just haven't been able to connect these people and perspectives together in an effective manner. And because this isn't acknowledged, we're just repeating forms of ineffectual, boring interactions, which will just ultimately frustrate the most capable people in an organisation, because they will just view it as a time sink and taking away from what they do best, which is a paradox of a lone wolf. So a lone wolf rarely gets the opportunity to only share their knowledge. They have to put their knowledge into practice, and that's what makes them valuable to the organisation. So they can't just rest on their lone wolf laurels. They're always working. Imagine how much better our organisations would be if they cracked the lone wolf code and they were able to share amongst all the people who are part of the organisation what it is about lone wolves that makes them so distinctive. But there's tension here because really with an organisation the focus is on the brand, the name of the organisation. It doesn't sit well with corporate culture to focus on people that really set themselves apart in terms of their capability, because the messaging of an organisation to the market, to the world, is the brand name is where the capability and the talent is. It doesn't come from individuals, because that takes focus away from the collective. And I understand that. I get it. It makes sense. But still, when we look within organisations, we see it's a handful of people that are really pushing performance. And because of this tension, if there are people who are falling behind in the organisation or they're not as effective as others, the finger is usually pointed at them because they're not following process, or they're not ticking off enough boxes, or they have not filled out enough spreadsheets, or they have not created enough PowerPoint decks, whatever. But because there is a general uncomfortableness with lone wolves, an organisation is usually unwilling to point to the high performance individuals as an example of behaviour to model. But I think that's the solution. Rather than an organisation demand that their people comply with long lists of performance requirements, I think it would be better for an organisation to identify the impressive individuals within their midst and then arrange for people with less experience to shadow those people. So is someone really great at client meetings? Well, rather than just have all the senior people in a client meeting, have the lone wolf in the client meeting, but then have the junior people or the less experienced people in the meeting to actually observe the type of behaviours and skills lone wolf demonstrates. Observing the behaviour of a successful person is far more effective than just setting up regular performance meetings with someone and telling them how to behave. Like in 2021, I don't really understand why we're still doing that. I think one thing lone wolves do instinctively is when they embark on a course of action, they choose a course of action that, if they are successful in whatever they're doing at that given time, the payoff, the potential payoff, will be much higher than just blasting through a list of tasks to keep their manager or supervisor happy. Nothing that a lone wolf dislikes more than being chased for completing tasks that have absolutely no bearing on their performance at work. That is a surefire way to piss a lone wolf off. But going back to what I was saying, a lone wolf, the solitary performer, they know that if they have 10 things in their diary today, they will quickly identify, because let's face it, everything that you need to do in any given day at your job, you're not going to get through everything. Let's just be honest about this. We can only do like 2, maybe 3 things really well. I think it's more like 2 myself. The lone wolf looks at the list of 10 things on their to-do list. They will quickly identify the things they should go after that will give them the best result. Maybe they won't succeed, but they know that the actions they choose potentially will have a bigger payoff because it's something the client really wants. It's something that will potentially grow the business. It's something that's going to make someone's life easier. But our organisations, for some reason, don't communicate this. And this is why I think integrating the lone wolves back into the collective, to grow the collective intelligence and performance of the organisation, really must involve people shadowing the lone wolf. Not every day, because that's not realistic, particularly when we're working from home, but see the lone wolf in action. One thing I feel I do reasonably well in my job is I feel I'm effective in face-to-face client meetings. That could be in person, which is rare now in 2021, or the video meeting, the virtual meeting, the Zoom meeting. And I often feel, particularly after I've had a successful meeting with successful outcomes with a client, afterwards I regret the fact that despite being lone wolfish, some of my other colleagues weren't in that meeting. A, they weren't invited, but B, if they were part of that meeting, they would have seen me in my environment and how I respond to clients, and they would have seen me enjoying the meeting, they would have seen the client enjoying the meeting, and they would have been able to observe the behaviour, and therefore they would go away and think about it, and they would be able to improve their own meeting as well. So it pleased me immensely when one of my younger colleagues actually sent me a message the other day, and they politely inquired whether they could actually join one of my client meetings to see what I do. And so naturally I said yes, and I'll arrange that. But that is initiative on the part of someone who understands to raise their own performance, they need to observe the performance of others. So shout out to my colleague, to Jill, if you're listening. Well done, mate. You'll join me in my next client meeting. I'm convinced lone wolves, the very presence of them in an organisation, the potential is there for them to have an outsized positive effect on the whole organisation. But that's really dependent on the quality of the environment or the quality of the interactions within that organisation. So that's something we really need to give serious thought to. Are we simply trying to shoehorn lone wolves into a culture or into a series of interactions where they're just simply going to become frustrated and even retreat into their lone wolfish tendencies because the cost of compliance to the culture is too high? I'm reminded of, there's a fantastic YouTube clip. I'll find the link to it and put it in the show notes. It's a short film about the environment within Yellowstone National Park in North America and the problems that the park was having in terms of erosion, animals disappearing, and wolves were reintroduced into the park over a period of time, but wolves hadn't been there for some time. And just the wolves being in the national park created what is referred to as a trophic cascade. So The environment of the park was completely restored. Animals came back, despite the fact that wolves do eat other animals. Plant life came back. Rivers and streams started to flow again. Trees came back, all because there was a handful of these unique creatures that were less in number than other creatures, but just their effect created this sort of virtuous cycle that restored the environment and restored it to the way it should be working. But the human tendency is to look at something dangerous or something we misunderstand, like a wolf, and eradicate it, eliminate it, because we perceive it to be difficult, we perceive it to be dangerous, and we just can't afford to think like that anymore in 2021. It's the time for looking at individuals and pointing the fingers at them and going, this person is hard to get along with, this person is the wrong fit. Well, they're probably the right person, but what's going on with our culture? What is going on with the interactions that are possible within our organisation? Because if there's only certain type of interactions available to us, like task-based interactions or complying with outdated processes, the problem isn't really people. The problem is the framework that we're expecting the people to work under. So we need to seriously rethink the way we interact with each other, particularly at work. As soon as we start doing that, it'll be easier for the lone wolves to share what makes them different, what makes them smart, what makes them perform well. Then we really do have a chance of increasing the collective intelligence of our organisations. So remember, if you're a lone wolf, speaking as a lone wolf myself, or a solitary strong ox, still like wolf better, don't look down your nose at your colleagues and think, well, they're inferior or they're not as good as you. Chances are they're trapped in a system or a culture which is really limiting their effectiveness, or they just haven't been able to see the behaviour of individuals who are successful, because those individuals tend to do their own thing or they're hidden by the organisation. So if you're a lone wolf, your colleagues are smart. They are likely deep, complex thinkers. They just are not embedded in a culture or a mechanism that allows them to display that. And if you're not a lone wolf, you're another type of complex thinker, and you regard the lone wolf or lone wolves in your organisation as deviant, or there's something wrong with them, well, perhaps it's time to rethink your viewpoint on them. A lone wolf, they might be introverted, but they're self-motivated and they're extremely focused on completing their own tasks. Remember, the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. So let's build better packs. Thanks for listening to Timbo Talks. I hope you liked this discussion on lone wolves. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can find it on Spotify or YouTube. If you want to reach out to me on the socials, I am Timbo Horan, TimboHoran, on Twitter or Instagram. I also have a website, that's timhoran, TimHoran.com. Until next time.